Greetings and welcome to Business Talk. I'm Deepak, your host, bringing you insights from the world of ideas, innovation, and impact. Today we have a special guest with us, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Robyn Koslowitz, an esteemed licensed child psychologist and an educational director of the Targeted Parenting Institute, as our distinguished guest on today's episode. Dr. Robyn earned her PhD in clinical child psychology from New York University and brings over 2 decades of experience to the field. She has been serving as a licensed child psychologist since 2002 and a licensed clinical psychologist since 2017. During her time at New York University, Dr. Robyn collaborated with several renowned scholars. She served as a research assistant to Dr. Ester Buchholz, a noted expert on child psychotherapy, Dr. Carol Gilligan, whose groundbreaking work in a different voice reshaped the understanding of women's and adolescent girls' psychology, and Dr. Sandee McClowry, a pioneer in temperament-based teaching and parenting interventions. A respected voice in media, Dr. Robyn is a frequent contributor to national conversations on child and adolescent psychology. She has appeared on networks such as Fox, National Public Radio, CNN, and NewsNation, and her insights have been featured in publications including National Geographic, Parents.com, Bustle, Care.com, and CNN. In this episode, Dr. Robyn Koslowitz will share valuable insights from her widely acclaimed book, Post-Traumatic Parenting, Break the Cycle, and Become the Parent You Always Wanted to Be. Kicking off this exciting conversation, let's warmly welcome Dr. Robyn Koslowitz to the show. It's a real privilege to welcome you, Dr. Robyn. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about this topic.
Thank you. Yeah. You open the book with a powerful sentiment. I want to parent differently than the way I was parented. Why is it often easier for post-traumatic parents to identify what not to do, but much harder to know what to do instead?
I think parenting in our brain is something that is sort of a copy-paste system. Our brain is set up to sort of do what our parents did. And I think that sometimes when we don't want to do exactly what our parents did, or when we're raising our kids in a very different context than where we were raised, which I think can sometimes be the part of, if you were raised in poverty, but now you're raising your children in a much more privileged economic circumstance. If you were raised with a stay-at-home parent, but you're a working parent, you can't always copy paste exactly what your parents did. And that's where sometimes it can become a problem. So our brain really just wants to copy paste. But when you have that list of things that you don't want to do, it's hard to know what you actually do want to do. So the function of my book is to help people, first of all, heal from whatever traumas are holding them back, but then to really boil down to how do we parent smarter, not harder? How do we know what to actually focus on and actually do?
You speak about parenting from a survival point of view. Can you unpack what that means and how it slowly shapes everyday parenting decisions, even in loving households?
So I think that parenting is a skill, right? And a skill is something that can be learned. People talk about like your parenting instinct. People talk about as though there's some magical, book of wisdom that gets inputted into your brain the minute your kid is born. But the truth is, it's a skill like any other skill. And like any other skill, it can be learned. So the goal is what's holding us back from learning the skill? And then how do we learn the skills that we need to parent? And the kicker, of course, is that at every age and stage of children, we have to relearn skills because parenting a toddler is not the same thing as parenting a middle schooler. It's not the same thing as parenting an adolescent. But it turns out, if you look at the research, there are some pretty well understood practices that parents should engage in and should avoid. And rather than second guess ourselves and rather than try a million social media trends, read a million books, let's just boil it down to what's essentially important in parenting and why you're blocked in doing it. And then let's fix that.
Post-traumatic parenting challenges trendy labels like gentle or responsive parenting. In what ways do these labels fall short, especially for parents navigating unresolved trauma?
So I feel like there's a lot of parents out there who are really attracted to responsive or conscious or gentle parenting from the perspective of they just don't want to harm their kids, right? They're conflict avoidant. They don't want to get into a fight with their kids. They don't want to yell at their kids. They don't want their kid to be mad at them. They say they're doing gentle parenting, but really what they're doing is avoiding conflict or people pleasing. There's nothing wrong with gentleness and responsiveness in our parenting, right? Of course, we want to be kind. We want to be neurodevelopment and child development informed. But when we're trying to script every single interaction with our children as though it's going to be a moment on TikTok, then we lose something in the authenticity of how to parent. And I think a lot of that does come from trauma. I think if you had a childhood you don't want to repeat, or if you've used up all your psychological resources dealing with a recent trauma, and I kind of feel like since COVID, a lot of people have that, where you suddenly wake up and it's a few years after COVID and you're in a different industry. Maybe you're living in a different house. You're in different economic circumstances. Like a lot changed. And you've used up so much psychological resources just surviving that. Now you want to parent. And of course, you're going to question yourself. Of course, especially with all the stuff on social media where it basically makes it sound like the instant you ever yell at your kid once, you've harmed their attachment forever. And like, let's just hope there'll be a good therapist for them when they grow up, right? Like there's this idea that somehow, one moment of parenting is going to ruin everything. Where, of course, there are moments of parenting that could ruin everything, but those would be such severe abuse. Those are probably not the people who are reading a parenting book, right? On the whole, there's so much pressure on parents. And then at the same time, we have all these messages about gentle unconscious parenting. In my book, I have a solution. I call it R2 parenting, responsive and responsible. And I look at it as a seesaw where you want to keep the seesaw balanced. You don't want to be too responsive or too responsible. So responsive is all that gentle stuff, right? It's all the things about, your child doesn't want to wear their sneakers and you're sitting there saying like, oh, you really don't want to wear your sneakers. They don't want to brush their teeth. Your middle schooler thinks that if you don't buy her the designer t-shirt that everybody else in her class has, you are making her commit social suicide forever. And of course, I can, on the responsive side, say like, you really want that t-shirt. It feels like if you don't have that t-shirt, your life is over. I can do all of that. I can talk to her about her big emotions. I can be very child development focused. Then there's the other side, which is responsible. I do have to teach my child how to navigate the demands of the world, right? In the end, you do have to wear your sneakers. In the end, that t-shirt is not within our budget. You do budgets at some point in your life if you're going to grow up and be a responsible adult. So I might have some sort of a compromise solution. I'm willing to spend $20 on a t-shirt for you. You want a $600 t-shirt that, mind you, looks precisely like the $20 t-shirt, but that's a separate conversation. You can come up with a plan for finding the other $580. No problem. I'll give you the 20 that I was ready to spend, and we can work together on a plan. Maybe that's the start of that kid's entrepreneurial journey, right? Like that's R2 parenting. I'm not so responsive that I just give you whatever you want and I never say the word no. But at the same token, I am gentle and kind in how I communicate, and I also set those boundaries.
Very insightful. Dr. Robyn, you described turning survival strategies into parenting superpowers. Can you share an example of how a parent might make the shift from trauma-based reaction to empowered, value-driven parenting?
Sure. So I find that when we're traumatized, our brain develops what I like to call the trauma app. And the trauma app is this sort of algorithm that says, when I feel stress, this is what I need to do. When I feel unsafe, this is what I need to do. So let's say people pleasing. Someone's raised with a very harsh, critical parents, and they learn to people please. They're just always smoothing troubled waters. They're always making everybody calm, and they're always doing that. They become a parent. You can't people please your kids, or they will eat nothing but junk food and have nothing but screen time. They will never do their homework, right? You have to sometimes say no. You have to sometimes tolerate their distress. The superpower of noticing people's emotional states, if you can say to your trauma app, I can notice my child's emotional state, that doesn't mean I have to react to it. Wow, you have a superpower right now. Me, I dissociate when I'm stressed out. I can literally, the world can be burning down around me and I am so focused on my work, I wouldn't notice. I was a mom of young kids and I was writing my dissertation on a train from NYU back to New Jersey. There could be a drunk guy like sleeping on my shoulder and I'm typing away so focused. It's a good thing that I was on the last stop or I probably would have ended up in another state, right? That works for me. However, when you're parenting and you want to be present, you can't parent with presence if you're dissociated, So I had to learn how to take my dissociation and undo it and learn how to manage stress in another way so that when I'm parenting, I can be me, not this dissociated robot who's really good at getting tasks done, right? I was a good technician of parenting, got my kids to do their homework, fed them healthy food, did bath time, did bedtime, but I wasn't there. So I had to learn how to be there. But my dissociation is a superpower. Most people have a hard time getting into a flow state. I can sit down and in tiny corners of time, like I always joke, I wrote this book in 10 minutes, like 10 minutes and 10 minutes and 10 minutes and 10 minutes. I'm a clinician. I work, I'm a psychologist. I see patients. I have kids. I very often only have a half hour here, a half hour there to do focused work. My dissociation superpower lets me do that. I wrote an entire book that way. Just doesn't work for parenting. So if you're a post-traumatic parent and perhaps you're an entrepreneur or you're in business, that superpower that makes you successful in business is probably the same thing that challenges you in your parenting. So what you need to learn how to do is mindfully shut off the permissions on that app when you're parenting, but keep it on when you're at work.
Many post-traumatic parents worry about passing on pain to their children. What would you say to a parent stuck in that fear, unsure of how to start healing while still being present for their child?
Yeah, so it's a little messy at the beginning, right? The healing part, because like I'm talking now from the place where I've learned how to manage stress without dissociating. But it's kind of like the montage, in those like movies, like the Rocky movies or Karate Kid, where like he goes from like the overweight, out of shape loser into the like champion. And they show you this training montage and it takes like 10 seconds and like he morphs into that person. That there's the messy middle of like every single day of doing that training. There was times that, when I was learning to undo dissociation while I was parenting, where I did yell, where I didn't cope the way I wanted to. But when I learned how to say, okay, it's just data, it's just information. What I need to do is say, okay, I didn't like the way supper time, bath time, bedtime, whatever went tonight. Let me learn from it. Let me troubleshoot. And maybe it's like, oh, my phone was on and I got a work call in the middle of all the chaos going on of trying to get the kids into bed. That's what derailed me. That's what got me to yell. I need to keep my phone plugged in the kitchen while I'm upstairs with the kids. So I troubleshoot, right? And so many post-traumatic parents, we feel such shame when we do something with our kids, like yell at our kids or, do whatever we said we weren't going to do. We don't want to learn from the data because we don't even want to think about the situation. But that failure is the best data point that helps you troubleshoot and figure it out for tomorrow. So your damage is not going to damage your kids because you have to remember that in parenting, there's always the possibility of repair. You can always sit down with your kids and say, hey, really didn't like how that went yesterday. Let's figure out, all of us together, sort of as a committee of, citizens of this family, how to make tonight go better, right? And take responsibility. I shouldn't have yelled at you guys. That wasn't okay. If my emotions got big, I should have taken a break. I know what to do when my emotions get big and I didn't do it. So I'm going to try harder next time. Right? And there's nothing wrong with doing that. The kids feel so supported and they learn how to take responsibility and they learn how to move forward and learn from their failures.
Your book emphasizes parenting in alignment with one's values. What's a practical first step for someone trying to define or rediscover their parenting values amid stress or emotional fatigue?
So this is going to be a little bit morbid. So just be prepared. It's an exercise I really like to do with people where if you were at your funeral and your kids were eulogizing you and talking about your parenting and what they remembered most from it, what are you hoping to hear? Right? Because if I'm hoping to hear, when my mom spoke to me, she was so present and she made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. And I knew that she loved me and she was always going to love me and nothing I would do would ever make her stop loving me, which are my parenting values. Then what do I need to do to get there? Right? You just told me your value. Because if you say that you want your kids to remember a organized home where everything felt safe and structured and you always knew what to expect, then I know what you value now. Right? So let's make a plan to get your home organized and structured and safe. Maybe you grew up in poverty and chaos and you want a home that just feels like coming into it as a breath of fresh air. All right, now we have to figure out the small steps to get to that kind of a home. Whatever you're imagining, you're fondly wishing your kids remember about you, that's your value. So now you know.
You have worked with countless families through the Center for Psychological Growth. What are some recurring myths or misconceptions you have encountered when it comes to trauma-informed parenting?
So I think the biggest myth is this idea that there's a parenting instinct, that like somehow it's downloaded into our brain that we're just going to know how to parent. It's just not true, right? Especially if you have trauma, because if you think about trauma, what trauma does is it trains our gut, but it trains our gut to be either very, very, very right or very, very, very wrong, right? When you have a flashback, your gut is very, very, very wrong, right? So when I'm in a situation, one of my flashback triggers, is very loud sounds. So sometimes I am somewhere and there are very loud sounds and it's not dangerous at all. At a concert, there's going to be very loud sounds. At a bowling alley, there's going to be very loud sounds. So my gut is wrong in that situation. So then I'm supposed to suddenly listen to my gut when it comes to my parenting, right? That doesn't make sense. What I have to do instead is understand that there's no such thing as a parenting instinct. There's only parenting skills. And I think the other big myth that we have about parenting is this idea that we're always going to do it perfectly all of the time, and you have to like be that perfect parent, like a cartoon character, perfectly responsive, perfectly attuned, perfectly warmed, always. You have to be that way mostly. The overall character of the relationship should be warm, but the research actually shows that there's three ways to respond to kids: optimal, adequate, and counterproductive. Right? We'll be super simple here. The best parents, like if you do research where you observe families and you pick out the best parents, the most skillful parents, and you code their interactions with their kids, which researchers have done, the best parents in the world are optimal 8% of the time. Right? You're going for optimal 8% of the time, but parents think you have to go for optimal 100% of the time. Adequate, good enough, is good enough for the other 92% of the time. So I think we put pressure on ourselves to be these optimal parents at all times, and I think social media does that to us. It's a myth. Adequate and moments of optimal is what you're really going for.
One of the most moving themes of the book is that idea that healing can happen through parenting. Can parenting itself become a kind of therapeutic journey? If so, how?
So this is really interesting, and there's actually research that came out after I wrote the book, so I couldn't include it in the book, which was like, in a way, so disappointing, and in a way, it was such validation that when you become a parent, you're uniquely neuroplastic. This is particularly true for mothers, but the idea is your brain is rewiring itself, trying to learn this new skill called parenting and keeping the little human alive. So your brain is very, very primed to grow and change. So what tends to happen is, so when you're parenting, when you're trying to recover from trauma, we're trying to rewire patterns in your brain, right? When I have flashbacks, I'm trying to teach my brain that sound was just a bowling alley. That was not the sound of a siren. This is not an emergency. Don't have a flashback. So I'm trying to rewire my brain. When my brain doesn't want to be rewired, it's harder to do. Right? We have this thing about neuroplasticity, right? Every business coach will talk about neuroplasticity. I always say neuroplasticity is such bad news, right? Everyone makes it sound like it's the best news in the world. It's the worst news in the world. The reason you are the way you are and the reason it's so hard to change a habit is because your brain is neuroplastic. Neurons that fire together wire together. The more they fire together, the more they wire together till they're welded. So then it's really hard to get them not to fire together. So if I hear a loud sound, it's really hard for my brain not to go into flashback. Except when you're parenting, your brain is suddenly very neuroplastic and it's easier to unwire and rewire connections then. So one of the lines that resonate with people in the book so much is this idea that, your inner child can't raise a child. Because how can my inner 8-year-old raise my 16-year-old, right? That doesn't make sense. But in raising my real world child, I can heal my inner child. Because when I give my real world child an experience I didn't have growing up, I can then experience that same experience from the point of view of the giver. So if I'm there when my child is going through stress and I can sit there and support her and talk it through with her, then my inner child who didn't always get that feels supported and experiences the concept of parental support in the same way as if I had experienced it as a child, and that helps me rewire my brain. And this sounds very like loosey-goosey and woo-woo, but it really is scientific. It's really this idea of being a parent means your brain is neuroplastic. And that is, so, in this context, that's very good news, because then we actually can reprocess our trauma and rewire our brain.
What advice do you have for co-parents or partners who may not share the same trauma history? but are trying to build a cohesive, supportive parenting approach together?
So it's a great question, right? Because we're not going to share the same history. And very often, what happens in parenting is we have certain assumptions about the world that we think, like, let's say we say family dinner. Family dinner to one partner might mean everyone sits around the table and there's like a starched tablecloth and, a salad course and a soup course and a main dish and we have a conversation. And family dinner to someone else might mean we're all like standing around in the kitchen, like eating at various stations, or we're all sitting in front of the TV. You might have had a conversation when you're dating, like, oh, we're going to have family dinners together. We're going to go on vacation together. We're going to, whatever. And what you meant by that and what your partner meant by that are two completely different things. And that can even be true if you were raised in the same culture, right? Because different families have different cultures. So what we have to do then is communicate. And we have to get to a place of shared values. Now, me and my co-parent may have a different way of getting to that value, right? One parent might say, I want my kids to feel seen and heard and understood. And that means spending a lot of time playing with them. Another parent might say, I want my kids to feel seen and heard and understood. And that might mean providing materially for them and making sure they have what they need. But you're valuing the same thing, you just have a different road to get there. And that's great because I actually think there's another parenting myth, which is this idea that we have to be consistent in our parenting and we both have to parent the same way. And I think that's such a myth. I don't even know where it came from. I think there's nothing wrong with having a point person and having like what I call the pod system, the parent on duty system. So like if you have one parent who really values expanding the kid's world, and what he means by that is cultural events. You go to the ballet, you go to the symphony, you go to the museum, and the wife is like, I'd rather have a root canal than sit through the opera. No problem. Dad can be the guy who takes you to the opera. And mom says, I want to expand their world. And that means enrolling them in gymnastics or taking them to the beach, right? Or cooking with them. And mom is the one who does those things. There's nothing wrong with a pod system. There's nothing wrong with saying, when I had this, my mother babysat my children when I was in graduate school. Here are grandma's rules for how you eat dinner. Here are mommy's rules for how you eat dinner. When grandma's giving you dinner, this is what you do. When mommy's giving you dinner, this is what you do. Kids are not confused by different systems, as long as we're not deceptive about it. We don't want to do the, don't tell dad that I gave you sugar before dinner, because that just teaches them to lie. It's more like, listen, when mom's in charge, I don't mind eating dessert first. When dad's in charge, we eat dessert at the end of the meal. No problem. Kids do not get confused by that. I developed the system during COVID when I really did have moments where my husband had to be in charge because I was working and trying to figure out this new technology called treating people over Zoom, and it was really scary and new. And there were moments when I was completely in charge and my husband was busy, and we just had the pod system. The rules when dad's taking care of you are different than the rules when mom's taking care of you. Kids can switch. It's fine.
Dr. Robyn, my last question. What do you hope every reader walks away with after finishing post-traumatic parenting, especially those who are still in the early stage of their healing journey?
So what I want them to know is that healing is possible, right? And that it's never too late in parenting. You can always repair. You can always fix it. I have so many people some people will call me up and they'll tell me about the book. I love your book. My kids are already 2, so it's too late. My kids are already 12. My kids are already 22. My kids are already 35. It's never too late to repair with a child. It's never too late to sit down with a kid who's 12 and say, I've been yelling a lot and I wish I wouldn't. I've read this book and now I'm going to try this new way. That's not even at all confusing. There's nothing wrong with doing that with a 35-year-old. As long as we're alive, we can repair. And it's so worth it, because the thing about parenting is that we've lost, I think especially over COVID, parenting is joyful. Parenting is healing. Parenting can be such a wonderful part of our life. It's not just a series of tasks that we need to accomplish, right? It's this wonderful journey for us and for our kids that isn't only healthy, it's also healing. So it's never too late, no matter what age or stage your kid is in, and no matter what trauma. So many people feel so damaged by their damage. But your damage is actually the beginning of your superpower. So if you look at it that way, then you absolutely can heal, and do it through your parenting, because you'll never have a better motivation than your own children.
Thank you, Dr. Robyn Koslowitz, for joining us on today's episode and for sharing such heartfelt, insightful reflections from your powerful book, Post-Traumatic Parenting: Break the Cycle and Become the Parent You Always Wanted to Be. Your work reminds us that parenting isn't just about raising children. It's also about healing ourselves, breaking generational patterns, and leading with intention rather than reaction. Your practical guidance, deep expertise, and compassionate approach offer a lifeline to show many parents navigating the complexities of trauma and striving to build joyful, connected relationships with their children. It's been an absolute privilege to learn from you today. We are grateful for your time, your voice, and your continued contribution to the field of child psychology and family psychology. Thank you once again, Dr. Robyn Koslowitz.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.